It was a sunny Monday morning when the political world braced itself for an explosive showdown. The White House had called a press briefing, but no one was prepared for what was about to unfold. Inside the briefing room, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The stage was set for a battle between two powerful figures in American politics, Karoline Leavitt, the newly appointed White House press secretary under President Donald Trump, and Karine Jean-Pierre, the current press secretary from the Biden administration. Karoline, known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach, had taken the job with one mission in mind: to reshape the narrative coming out of the White House and challenge the media's portrayal of the Trump administration. She had already made waves with her candid remarks and unrelenting defense of President Trump's policies. In contrast, Karine Jean-Pierre, a veteran of the Biden administration, had often found herself on the defensive during her press briefings, struggling to balance the political agenda of the current administration with the tough questions from reporters. The press conference that day was supposed to be routine. Both Karoline and Karine were scheduled to answer questions about the latest policy updates and the state of the nation. But the moment the two women entered the room, it was clear that this briefing was going to be different. The press corps was buzzing with excitement. News outlets had already started speculating about the potential clash between the two. As the briefing began, reporters asked their usual questions ranging from inflation to foreign policy, but there was a palpable sense that something more explosive was about to happen. Karine Jean-Pierre answered with her usual carefully crafted responses, while Karoline sat back, waiting for her moment. The first spark of tension came when a reporter from Fox News posed a question that sent the room into a frenzy. The question was directed at Karine Jean-Pierre about the Biden administration's handling of the economy, specifically the rising inflation rates and the record-high gas prices. Jean-Pierre, as expected, dodged the question, providing a vague response about how the administration was working hard to bring prices down and support American families. But Karoline wasn't having it. Without hesitation, she leaned forward, microphone in hand, ready to strike. Karine, with all due respect, Karoline began, her voice calm but laced with authority, the American people aren't buying the spin. The reality is, inflation is through the roof and families are struggling to make ends meet. The Biden administration's policies have failed and you've been on the front lines defending them. Karine Jean-Pierre's expression faltered for a moment, a brief flicker of unease crossing her face. But she quickly regained her composure, responding, "We are working hard every day to address the challenges our nation faces. Inflation is a global issue and we are committed to finding solutions." Karoline wasn't finished. "Global issue or not, Karine, Americans are feeling the pinch right now. Under President Trump, we had a booming economy. Gas prices were low, wages were up, and people had more money in their pockets. What do you say to the millions of Americans who feel like they've been left behind?" The room went silent for a moment. Karine Jean-Pierre shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but she knew she had to respond. She began speaking, but it was clear that her words lacked conviction. She stumbled over her answers, trying to deflect blame and point fingers at external factors. "Look," Karine said, "the economic challenges we're facing are unprecedented. We're working with our allies to manage the situation." Karoline wasn't about to let her off the hook. "Unprecedented? That's the word you always use when things go wrong. The fact is, Karine, the Biden administration's policies are causing the pain that everyday Americans are feeling. You can keep talking about global factors, but the truth is that your president's economic agenda is failing." The room buzzed with murmurs as Karine Jean-Pierre tried to gather herself. Karoline had landed a punch, and it was clear that Karine wasn't ready for the direct challenge. The tension was thick in the air, and every eye in the room was on them. But this was just the beginning. The real confrontation was about to unfold as Karoline prepared to expose the cracks in the Biden administration's narrative while Karine struggled to keep her composure. The tension in the room continued to build as Karoline Leavitt sat confidently, her posture straight, eyes locked on Karine Jean-Pierre. There was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. Reporters were practically on the edge of their seats, waiting for what would come next. Karoline had made her move, but Karine wasn't going to back down without a fight. Karine, trying to regain her footing, took a deep breath and addressed the room once again. "The American people elected President Biden to bring change, to bring unity, and to rebuild what was broken," she said, her voice firm, but there was a slight tremor that betrayed her discomfort. "We are working hard to implement policies that will create long-term economic stability." "Long-term stability?" Karoline shot back, her tone cold and cutting. "What about the short term? What about the millions of families who can't even afford groceries this month? How are you going to explain that, Karine?" This administration's policies are suffocating the American middle class. The press room erupted in a flurry of whispers. It was rare for a press secretary to go after another press secretary so aggressively, and the audience could feel the heat in the air. Karine Jean-Pierre, despite her best efforts to appear calm, seemed visibly flustered. She tried to steer the conversation back to her scripted talking points, but Karoline was relentless. "Let's talk about the border crisis for a moment, shall we?" Karoline continued, her voice now dripping with disdain. "Under the Biden administration, we've seen an unprecedented surge in illegal immigration. You've called it a challenge, Karine, but let's be clear, it's an outright disaster. Families in Texas, Arizona, and California are terrified as their communities are overwhelmed by an influx of people who are being let in without proper vetting." Karine's face flushed as Karoline's words struck a nerve. She had no good response to that. The Biden administration had struggled with the crisis at the southern border for months, and it was one of the few issues where even the media had begun to hold them accountable. Karine fumbled, trying to explain how the administration was working with local authorities and international partners to address the situation, but it was clear her heart wasn't in it. "Karine, don't try to sugarcoat it," Karoline pressed. "The American people see the chaos every day on their news screens. The Biden administration's policies are encouraging lawlessness, and you know it. You're out here trying to tell the world that everything is under control, but let's be honest, it's a mess." There was a moment of silence. Karine Jean-Pierre opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. The frustration was beginning to show on her face. Karoline had expertly exposed the weaknesses of the Biden administration's handling of the border, and it was clear that Karine had no answer for it. Before Karine could gather her thoughts, a reporter from CNN chimed in, clearly eager to stir the pot. "Karoline, if the Trump administration was so successful on the border, why didn't President Trump resolve this issue in 4 years?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "Because unlike the Biden administration, President Trump took action," she said firmly. "He built the wall, he enforced strict immigration laws, and he held our neighboring countries accountable. The border was secure under President Trump. But now under Biden, it's a free-for-all." The room was buzzing with energy. Reporters were scribbling furiously in their notebooks and cameras clicked nonstop. Karine Jean-Pierre, unable to recover from Karoline's rapid-fire attacks, shot a glare at her adversary, her expression hardening. "I'm not here to relive the past," Karine finally responded, her voice sharp. "I'm here to talk about the future and the actions this administration is taking to move us forward." Karoline didn't let her off the hook. "You want to talk about the future? Fine. Let's talk about the disaster that's unfolding right now. Gas prices are sky high, the economy is in shambles, and crime is surging in our cities. You and your administration have failed to address the real issues Americans are facing. You're more concerned with pushing a radical left-wing agenda than actually solving problems." Karine Jean-Pierre's face went pale, and she could feel the heat from the cameras. The weight of Karoline's words was sinking in. She tried to regain control, but Karoline was on fire. It wasn't just about defending President Trump's legacy anymore. Karoline had turned this into a full-on critique of the Biden administration, and Karine was losing ground fast. A reporter from Fox News, sensing the opportunity, asked, "Karine, do you acknowledge that the Biden administration's handling of the economy and the border has been less than effective?" Karine hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. It was clear she wasn't prepared for such a direct question. She stammered, We are focused on solutions. The president is committed to ensuring prosperity for all Americans." But Karoline wasn't interested in letting her off easy. "Solutions? You've had over 2 years, Karine. If you had any real solutions, we wouldn't be in this mess. The American people deserve better." At this point, it was clear to everyone in the room Karine Jean-Pierre was in over her head. Karoline had taken control of the briefing, and there was no escaping her pointed criticism. The cameras flashed relentlessly, and reporters watched with bated breath as the two press secretaries clashed in real time. The energy in the room was electric. Reporters shifted in their seats, eager for more. The atmosphere had transformed from a routine press briefing into a full-scale political brawl. Karoline Leavitt, the upstart White House press secretary under President Trump, was on fire, her every word cutting through the carefully constructed narratives that Karine Jean-Pierre had tried to uphold. Karine, meanwhile, was visibly flustered, struggling to maintain her composure as her counterpart relentlessly exposed the flaws in the Biden administration's policies. "Karine, let's talk about your president's foreign policy for a second," Karoline began, her voice now laced with a biting edge. "How do you explain the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan? Under President Biden, the country was left in chaos and Americans were left behind. It was a humiliation on the world stage, and yet here you are, talking about solutions when you can't even handle something as basic as an orderly evacuation. Karine's face flushed crimson. She had expected the question, but the sheer force of Karoline's delivery was hard to contend with. "We learned from the mistakes of Afghanistan," Karine replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "The president was committed to ending a 20-year conflict and bringing our troops home." "Committed?" Karoline shot back, her tone mocking. "Let's call it what it was, a failure. You left behind billions in military equipment and the Taliban paraded through Kabul like it was their victory parade. That's not ending a war, that's surrender." The reporters were captivated, and cameras clicked non-stop as Karine Jean-Pierre stammered, unable to mount an effective defense. Karoline was relentless. President Trump had a plan to withdraw responsibly, but under Biden, everything fell apart. "You can talk about commitment all you want, Karine, but the world saw exactly what your president is capable of, nothing but incompetence and failure." Karine blinked, the weight of Karoline's words pressing down on her. She opened her mouth, but no response came. Her talking points were useless in the face of such a direct attack. The room felt as though it was holding its breath. Karine finally managed to compose herself, but it was clear the momentum had shifted. "We are moving forward, Karoline," Karine said with what little confidence she had left. "We're focused on rebuilding our relationships with our allies and ensuring that the mistakes of the past are not repeated." "Rebuilding relationships?" Karoline interrupted. "Please, the world has lost faith in the Biden administration. From NATO to the Middle East, America's allies are questioning our leadership. And with China and Russia flexing their muscles, your president has made us look weak." There was an uncomfortable silence in the room as Karine tried to compose her thoughts. She had no solid response to Karoline's accusations. Karoline had exposed the Biden administration's foreign policy failures in a way that left little room for denial. Karine Jean-Pierre was being outmaneuvered at every turn, and she knew it. At this moment, Karoline seized the opportunity to drive her point home. "You talk about rebuilding relationships, but under President Trump, America was respected. Countries around the world knew where we stood, and they knew that we would not back down. But now, thanks to your president, we're seen as a joke." Karine's eyes narrowed as she prepared for the inevitable comeback, but it was clear that Karoline had taken control of the narrative. The room was buzzing with the energy of a political clash that few had ever witnessed. Reporters, some of whom had been covering White House press briefings for years, were stunned by the ferocity and precision of Karoline's attacks. "Karoline," a reporter from NBC finally called out, "don't you think you're oversimplifying things? Foreign policy is incredibly complex, and while there were certainly challenges in Afghanistan, there are broader goals at play here. You can't reduce it to just one event." Karoline's response was swift, and the room fell silent as she fired back. "What's complex about the failure to evacuate American citizens safely? What's complex about allowing the Taliban to take control of a country after 2 decades of American presence? Foreign policy is about strength, not appeasement. Under Biden, we've seen nothing but weakness." There was a moment of silence before another reporter asked, "Karoline, do you truly believe that President Trump's policies were flawless?" There were also significant criticisms during his administration, particularly concerning his handling of the pandemic. Karoline paused for a moment, her expression hardening. No administration is perfect, and President Trump would be the first to admit that. But let's be clear, his handling of the pandemic was far more effective than what we've seen under President Biden. While the Trump administration prioritized vaccine development and rapidly distributed vaccines, Biden's team has struggled to get control of the situation. The fact is, the American people are looking for strong leadership, and right now, they're not seeing it from this administration. As Karoline spoke, she could feel the pressure building, but it only fueled her determination. She knew the stakes were high and the entire political world was watching. She was not about to let Karine off the hook. The conversation had shifted from policy to a battle of narratives, and Karoline was firmly in control. The room seemed to hold its collective breath as the two women exchanged glances. Karine Jean-Pierre's lips pressed together in a tight line, her frustration evident. It was clear that she was outmatched, her carefully crafted responses no match for the rapid-fire precision of Karoline's attacks. As the briefing continued, it became increasingly clear that Karoline Leavitt was not only dominating the narrative but had also completely thrown Karine Jean-Pierre off balance. The press room, once filled with routine questions and diplomatic responses, had transformed into an intense battlefield. Karoline's sharp critiques had peeled back the thin veneer of calm that Karine had carefully cultivated, revealing the cracks in the Biden administration's policies. Karine, visibly shaken but still trying to maintain some semblance of control, glanced at her notes. She was scrambling to regain her footing, but Karoline was relentless, her words cutting through the air like a razor. "Karine, let's not forget another pressing issue, crime," Karoline said, her voice calm but seething with precision. Under President Biden's policies, crime has surged in major cities across the nation. While your administration talks about defunding the police, communities are being torn apart by lawlessness. And yet, all we hear from you is empty rhetoric about reimagining law enforcement. The room fell into a hush. Karine, unable to deflect the accusation this time, took a moment to collect herself. "We are committed to ensuring that all communities are safe," she replied, her voice wavering slightly. "The president has been clear about his support for law enforcement, but we also believe in addressing the root causes of crime and creating a fairer justice system." Karoline's response was swift, and she didn't give Karine a moment to breathe. "Fairer justice system? That's exactly what you want the American people to believe while crime rates are skyrocketing. You can't blame root causes when the problem is right in front of you: violent crime, looting, and the breakdown of law and order. Your administration's inability to acknowledge this problem is a huge disservice to the people who live in those communities." The reporters' pens moved furiously across their notebooks, capturing every word. Karine's eyes darted around the room, desperate to find an angle to regain the upper hand, but Karoline had already cornered her. She wasn't allowing any room for retreat. "You claim to support law enforcement, but under your watch, cities like Portland and Seattle became battlegrounds for radical protests," Karoline continued, her voice unwavering. "You allowed the defund the police movement to gain momentum, and now you expect the American people to just accept the chaos?" Karine Jean-Pierre's face hardened. It was a direct hit, and Karoline knew it. "That's not what's happening," Karine insisted, though her tone lacked the conviction it had earlier. "The president supports law enforcement and is committed to addressing the root causes of crime, including economic disparity and systemic injustice." "Systemic injustice?" Karoline laughed dryly. "Karine, that's just a buzzword you throw around to deflect responsibility. The reality is that your party has turned a blind eye to the destruction happening on American streets. People are scared and they want answers. They don't want more excuses." At this point, Karine could no longer keep her cool. She raised her voice, hoping to regain some authority. "We're not going to sit here and let you attack this administration without recognizing the progress we've made. Crime is not as simple as you make it out to be." Karoline leaned forward, her eyes locking with Karine's. "Progress? Karine, your administration has spent years ignoring the problems. The American people see what's happening in their neighborhoods. They see the violence, the theft, and the destruction. And they know that the Democrats have failed to address it." The room went quiet again. Karine, now visibly sweating, knew she was running out of time. She had no response to the directness of Karoline's critiques. Karoline was painting a picture of an administration that was failing on issue after issue, and Karine's attempts to defend it only made her appear weak and unprepared. The tension in the air was palpable. Karine, struggling to regain control, glanced at the clock. The briefing was supposed to end soon, but it was clear that this confrontation was far from over. Karoline had the momentum, and she wasn't going to let up. "Let's talk about the border again," Karoline said, not even waiting for Karine to respond. "Under President Trump, we saw a dramatic reduction in illegal crossings and human trafficking. But under Biden, the border has been completely overrun. And what's your answer? You've got a do-nothing approach where you refuse to take action, and meanwhile, the American people are paying the price." Karine clenched her jaw, trying to maintain her composure, but Karoline wasn't giving her any space to recover. "What would you say to the millions of Americans who are living in fear because your administration is too weak to protect them?" For the first time in the briefing, Karine appeared genuinely lost for words. She had no rebuttal. She had no defense for the failure at the border. And it was becoming increasingly apparent that Karoline Leavitt had completely overshadowed her, both in terms of preparation and presence. A reporter from the Washington Post, sensing the shift in dynamics, jumped in. "Karoline, do you believe that the Trump administration's approach to immigration was sustainable long-term? Without hesitation, Karoline responded, absolutely. President Trump's policies were focused on securing the border and ensuring the safety of American citizens. We didn't just talk about solutions, we implemented them. The wall was built and we saw real results. The problem now is that Biden's policies have opened the floodgates and we're seeing the consequences every day. Karine, her face now a shade of red that was impossible to ignore, tried to regain her composure. That's not the reality, she muttered, but it was clear she no longer had the confidence to challenge Karoline's assertions. Karoline pressed on. The reality, Karine, is that you and your administration have been failing the American people on every front, economically, on the border, with crime, and in foreign policy. You can keep spinning your rhetoric, but the American people aren't fooled anymore. The tension in the room was palpable as the briefing neared its conclusion. Karine Jean-Pierre, her usual calm demeanor shattered, had tried to fight back, but it was clear to everyone that she was no longer in control. Karoline Leavitt had taken the stage in a way that no one could have predicted, dismantling Karine's arguments piece by piece with a precision that left her counterpart struggling for any coherent response. As the clock ticked down on the briefing, Karoline Leavitt saw an opportunity to land the final blow. She had exposed the weaknesses of the Biden administration on nearly every front: economic, immigration, crime, and foreign policy. Now it was time to tie it all together, to finish what she had started and leave a lasting impact on everyone watching, both in the room and at home. Karine, Karoline began, her voice steady but tinged with the sharpness of someone who knew they were about to deliver the knockout punch. You've talked a lot about the future, about your administration's plans. But let's be real for a second. The American people don't care about your plans anymore. They care about results. Karine opened her mouth to respond, but Karoline wasn't done. Under President Trump, America was strong. We had a growing economy, secure borders, and a world that respected us. Under President Biden, we have soaring inflation, a crumbling economy, and a country that has lost its standing on the world stage. You can talk about unity and solutions all you want, but the truth is that your policies have failed and the American people are paying the price. A ripple of agreement could be heard from some of the reporters in the room. Many of them, who had watched both administrations up close, had witnessed the stark contrast in leadership. It was clear that Karoline's words were resonating. Karine tried to respond, but her voice faltered. She was too far behind and the pressure was overwhelming. We are committed to the American people, Karine said weakly, but the conviction wasn't there. She knew it, the reporters knew it, and Karoline knew it. The damage had been done. Karoline continued, her eyes unwavering. The American people want action. They want results. They don't want more empty promises and political jargon. And while your administration continues to push a radical leftist agenda, President Trump was focused on what truly matters: securing the future of this country. The reporters, who had been largely quiet during the back and forth, could feel the weight of Karoline's final statement. It wasn't just another criticism, it was a direct indictment of the Biden administration's inability to meet the expectations of the American people. There was no turning back now. Karine Jean-Pierre, her shoulders sagging, finally lowered her gaze. She had no more answers, no more defenses. She had been outmatched, outclassed, and utterly overshadowed by Karoline Leavitt. You've had your say, Karine said, her voice barely above a whisper, but this isn't the reality the American people see. Oh, but it is, Karine, Karoline shot back, a small, victorious smile tugging at the corner of her lips. This is the reality. And they see it every single day. A silence hung over the room. Karine Jean-Pierre stood there, her face a mask of frustration and exhaustion, while Karoline Leavitt, poised and confident, had delivered a devastating blow to the Biden administration. The press room, once filled with the noise of debate and conflict, was now eerily quiet. Finally, a reporter from ABC News asked the question that seemed to hang in the air. Karine, how do you respond to Karoline's criticism? Do you think the Biden administration has failed to meet the expectations of the American people? Karine took a long breath, her eyes darting around the room, but the words didn't come. She had no response that could salvage her position. Karoline had stripped away every talking point, every piece of spin. Karine's silence spoke volumes, and the reporters, seeing the opportunity for a final comment, quickly moved on to the next topic. Karoline's expression softened slightly, but she didn't take her eyes off Karine. The truth is out there, Karine. It's in the rising gas prices, in the headlines about crime and lawlessness, in the border crisis. It's in every single American household that's struggling to make ends meet. Your administration might want to ignore it, but the rest of us can see it clear as day. With that, Karoline stood up, her posture impeccable, and she walked confidently toward the exit. Karine Jean-Pierre, still frozen at the podium, watched as Karoline left the room, leaving behind the sound of clicks from cameras and the murmur of reporters who were already speculating on the outcome of this epic showdown. As the doors closed behind Karoline, the press room erupted into conversation. The briefings would never be the same again. The legacy of this moment would linger long after the event itself had ended. Karoline Leavitt had made her mark and Karine Jean-Pierre had been left reeling. The political world would undoubtedly spin the event in different ways, but one thing was clear: Karoline Leavitt had decisively taken down Karine Jean-Pierre, and in doing so had showcased the strength, precision, and clarity of her vision for America's future. The battle for the narrative had been won, and Karoline Leavitt had come out victorious.